Hey there, thanks for watching this video. So we're going to talk today about YC's content strategy. I'm sure you know Y Combinator, the most prominent startup accelerator in the world. When a company is accepted to YC, they invest a total of £500,000, and today they've turned that into over $600 billion of enterprise value. YC's brand is absolutely crucial to their business. Without their branding, they couldn't get startup founders to apply to the accelerator, give up equity in the company, and without the brand, they couldn't get investors to come out to the demo day either. But because of YC's prestige, investors know they're going to see good returns, and so every year they come and invest into the companies that go through the accelerator. But I think it's really important to look at how did they become this prominent accelerator and what in the world kind of is their content strategy that is generating these huge audiences, huge application numbers, and how does that compare to what other funds and VCs are doing. And so we're just going to take a look at that today and how we think about content at Refinery Media. So usually when we're talking about personal brands for partners of funds, we really start with this kind of mission statement that drives the content types. And then through the content types, they're talking about their business, their funds, and their projects. And so the four kind of content pillars are usually tactical content, insightful content, aspirational content, and personal content. And we'll show you how YC does all of those things. And what this creates is this attention, retention, monetization loop. And this is true for all personal brands, but how that specifically applies to VC is usually around this attention. So creating content to generate attention about a fund, then using something like email newsletters to then own that audience, which is the retention. So that could be capturing people's email addresses, bringing people into communities or into webinars, and then lastly, monetization. And so a lot of the audience in VC gets monetized through investing directly into companies, but it can also be monetizing LPs, paid events, services, or communities as well. And so when we work with venture funds, we usually think about creating these monthly flywheels. I'm just going to show you as how YC has kind of done this as well. And so this typically looks like starting with a long form asset, breaking it down into short form, tracking portfolio companies, and then lastly, moving into that retention phase of the audience through the newsletter and utilize the CRM. And so YC, obviously, super famous for their long form content. Paul Graham in 2005 started writing essays online that have massively shaped Silicon Valley startup and venture capital culture today. In 2014, the startup school came along and it was kind of more compounding effect of the legacy that Paul Graham left, followed on by Sam Altman. With all of this really, really high quality content, what they've been able to do is they've masterfully repurposed this content and reshaped it for each different platform. You'll see today how they used the YC YouTube channel to break down that into blogs, to go into short form content across Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. They're using video clips, they're using longer form essays or even shorter form writing, and they're getting that across all platforms as well. Lastly, tracking the funds. This is really important for venture capital funds and for YC when they have so many portfolio companies. They usually are doing this in the form of these demo day launches. If you look at their Twitter or their LinkedIn page, it will be full of, if it's F24 batch or Winter 25 batch, it will be the latest announcements from those companies that are in the batch. These are really widely shared because the portfolio company founders get behind them, and this creates just this kind of more buzz, more activity, especially when there are hot startups coming through the batches, or even like we've seen in recent times, some controversial startups as well. Then all of this is basically driving towards this kind of top of funnel approach that will filter people down through their content, through their brand, and ultimately lead to applications. And then they come back and they do the whole thing again. And so what this actually looks like in practice is they start with those pillars of content that we talked about earlier, the tactical, the aspirational, the insightful, and the personal. And so this is aspirational content about successful startups. It's inspirational content that's kind of educational to founders as well. It's tactical content. So this is like very granular go-to-market content. And then lastly, their personal content too. So each of the partners of YC has a very strong brand. They're very public. This is when we see here Paul Graham's essays was kind of the first sort of personal brand content that was coming out of YC. Sam Altman did the same with office hours in 2014. And then when they put on events, when they put on demo days, when they've done things like Startup School, they're repurposing all of that content into these content formats as well. And then this is going out over short form, long form, YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn as well. This is then creating this funnel that's pushing people into Y Combinator's like community engagement. And this is where they then start to build on this kind of startup lure where they're using things like YC's co-founder matching, so getting people into the funnel, so creating accounts on Y Combinator to look for other co-founders. This is a really successful way to start and surface new startups, to kind of reinforce YC as this place to start startups. And this goes directly to their mission statement, which is their goal is to cause there to be more startups by helping founders to start them. And so Hacker News is also that as well. Like in the early day, 2006, Hacker News was this place for startup founders or people interested in, computer science to come together and post, and it created this community that is still going today. And this has become kind of an important piece of this engagement flywheel in Y Combinator's lore, and a lot of like the essays that Paul Graham has written, or that the content that Sam Altman was putting out as well when he was president. And then ultimately, this is trying to funnel people into applications. Like if you look at the content on the co-founder matching, if you look at the content on the Hacker News, there's so many questions about how to apply, what's the best way to get in, when should I apply, all of this. And this is all funneling down into applications. For the last batch, they had 20,000 applications. They select 200, so about 1% of applications. Then when they have new startups, this is adding even more to the content flywheel, because they have the content that's coming out of demo day. They're posting that content on the LinkedIn, on the Twitter, and then the new startups, when they graduate, are constantly feeding this lure of Y Combinator. They're telling stories, posting their own content about YC. They're engaging themselves in Hacker News or the YC Reddit. They're encouraging other people to apply. And then as the startups themselves, as they then come into these success stories, this is really where their content flywheel starts to compound. Sam Altman was starting Looped, then coming back as president, going on to do all the things that he's done with OpenAI, still feeding back into this, talking about YC. He goes and gives talks about YC. Alexis Ohanian at Reddit does the same thing as well. All of these successful Brian Chesky YC founders are always going back and kind of giving their flowers to Y Combinator. And ultimately, this has led to some of them being presidents or partners as well, which then comes back into this personal brand of those people. Think about someone like Tom Blomfield, who kind of enters this flywheel as a founder, goes all the way through applying through his startups, has a success, and then comes back, and there's now a core pillar of the content that he's doing as well. Even Garry Tan's journey from volunteering as a photographer at YC, going through the process of then joining a startup through YC, has his successes, comes back, and is now a face and a pillar of their content as well. And so that's kind of how they're doing all of this, and this is really aligning to this kind of classical VC content flywheel. Just a look at how we got here too. So the evolution of content coming out of YC has been super impressive in the last 2 or 3 years with Garry Tan being president. You're seeing even more content being put out by them across YouTube, across LinkedIn, across Twitter, and it's actually now one of their main sources of acquisition for applicants. And so just kind of going to look at the journey through and how they've done that, and then think about how that applies to venture capital firms today. How can they learn from what YC has created? And so in 2005 was the first Paul Graham essay, How to Start a Startup. This is kind of was derived from a talk of Harvard, but this is kind of where YC is also founded in 2006. And so this is like the beginning of it all. So it's almost started with this content and then created this community of YC. They invested in that community. And so this is that attention through the essays, retention through the community, and monetization through the equity. Obviously, YC's continued to go on. 2006, they launched Hacker News, and this is extending out this top of funnel. This is the start of the extended community. There are people who have not gone through Y Combinator who are starting to now feel part of the community, part of their thesis, part of their ethos. As Paul Graham is sharing ideas, like make something people want, people are coming together on Hacker News to talk about this content and this ideas. YC then continues to grow. They start having their first big exits, 2010, OMG Pop, 100 million plus exit to Zynga. Reddit sold to Case Nostra as well. Dropbox as well, one of the other early companies, is scaling rapidly in this 2010. So it's building back into this lore. The stories about Reddit, OMG Pop, Dropbox, etc. are being shared on things like Hacker News. Paul Graham is talking about the stories they've learned, and it's filling in this flywheel that we just looked at here. From there, 2012 is when they launched their YouTube channel. So this is where they get Mark Zuckerberg. It's the first ever video on their startup school YouTube channel. And this is the same thing as kind of Hacker News. It's kind of extending out that community. So YC is sharing their knowledge to get this more applicants in that top of funnel, to teach more people about startups, which will ultimately get to more applicants, better quality startups, and higher returns on investments is the thesis there. And so, yeah, this kind of now moves into Sam Altman's presidency in 2014, which is also when they had 60 startups acquired that year. So it pushes all of those stories about those startup acquisitions, now nearly 10 years of YC, all of those people from 2008, Justin Kahn, Sam Altman himself, telling stories about early days of Jessica Livingston, Paul Graham, and feeding this law. And as part of that, Sam starts Office Hours, which is kind of where they consistently start hitting these YouTube videos that fall into this tactical, aspirational, and insightful personal brand content for Sam Altman about starting startups, and starts to really kind of grow a good audience. But it's slow. It takes them 9 years to reach 40 million views, which is obviously still a huge amount of views, but they start to really learn how to compound this content over a long period of time. As part of this as well, they start expanding out this kind of extended community. And so they launched the job board. There's a lot of other tools they launch at the same time, like the actual online school portal for Startup School was here. And so this is part of like this scaling this retention engine, as the attention has been compounding through the content that Sam Altman has done, building on Paul Graham's legacy. They're now scaling out this retention function. And ultimately what that led to over the next few years of Sam Altman's presidency is extending out the monetization piece of YC as well, as they started accepting in more companies and even doing the growth stage fund as well, which has since shut down. 2019, Garry leaves Initialized and he comes back into YC. And this is when they also launched the co-founder matching, which is another just huge example of how they've built these tools to get people to come back to their mission of starting more startups, which will ultimately feed into more applications over time as well. Under Garry, there has been massive YouTube growth. This is kind of really when they professionalized, productionized the content they've been putting out. And from here, where it took them 9 years to reach 40 million views, in just 2 years, they extended that to 70 million views. So now they're really reaping the benefits of all of this foundational content from Paul Graham, all of the open hours content, and Startup School content from Sam Altman and Garry has come in and really just building on top of that, creating this startup law narrative of YC. And the way that they do that is through showcasing all the partners, the alumni, the stories. Like, just look at this screenshot of the YouTube channel, seeing stuff in there from Tom Blomfield, David Lieberman, Michael Siebel, all of these people. They're showing all of their faces, talking about stories of companies like Stripe, Lyft, etc., who have gone through Y Combinator. So adding into this law of like, oh wow, I want to go to Y Combinator, because they're talking about all of the success stories that have also been through it as well. As part of Garry presidency, they start to develop out into these additional content formats as well, start taking things like their thumbnails very seriously. Like, if you look at the evolution from where these thumbnails have gone, is the other thumbnail image as well. So these are from 5-6 years ago, now into this professionalized, productionized version of it as well, to really kind of distribute this content most effectively. This has now started to see them move into documentary style episodes. So this documentary on Tom Blomfield, which is awesome. It's kind of adding into this law of YC again, building onto this flywheel here of using the people within YC as part of this pillar of content to then keep this flywheel rolling. Short form content is a big thing that they're looking at the moment. So they're starting to distribute this out over YouTube Shorts, TikTok, Instagram. They're doing a really good job of that as well. And now what you're seeing even more is that the law does the messaging for YC. There's tons of other content out there that isn't YC endorsed, that isn't YC sponsored, that is about getting into YC, that is about the YC ethos, that is about kind of the YC messaging, that is analyzing YC startups, how to get in, and all of this as well. And now in 2025, media is the second largest source of Y Combinator applicants. And so with this, I think this is where we see the biggest underlying lesson of Y Combinator's media strategy, venture capital funds. It's really that this cost of ignoring content because of how YC is doing it is so large. There were 3,000 founders who applied to the last Tech Stars batch. They have 835 videos with only 1 million views. And YC, there were 20,000 applied to the last batch. So the opportunity cost of not putting out this content, of not taking media seriously as a VC fund or an accelerator is increasingly costly. But then, so what do we do? What do we do? Because we don't all have 13 full-time staff on content like YC do. So I would say begin with these steps. So the first one is identify natural content creators. This doesn't have to be a partner, but ideally is within your fund. It could be just an associate or an analyst that you have on your team who just loves content, whether that's writing, whether that's video content, whether that's podcasts, whatever that is. Allow those with authentic voices and willingness to go out and share that content as well. Then develop mantras. So what are the 3 key principles that define your firm's approach? For YC, make something people want is just a huge cornerstone of startup in Silicon Valley. What is that phrase for you? Define that mantra. It will help your team align internally and also help you to kind of consistently, when you're producing content, point back to, does it match our mantra? Does it match who we are as a fund? Start with one high quality series. I think YC is, easy to look at this from a zoomed out perspective, but this is really where YC started with Paul Graham essays, which are still, incredibly widely read. So what is that? Who and where are the channels where you can write the highest quality content, put out the highest quality content? Maybe for some funds that is podcasting. Maybe for some funds that's a newsletter or blog posts. So start with that one high quality series and then just commit to it. Documenting the journey, I think, is really important as well. Can you turn the firm's day-to-day into content, meetings, decisions, successes, and things like that? One of the things that Y Combinator does as part of this is giving away kind of tips from the partners about how to get into YC. This is they talk very openly about the selection process. They talk openly about why they rejected certain startups. There's stories of Replit's first time applying and getting rejected as like part of this legendary story. They talk about those decisions that they've made as a partner team. And then lastly, hire for distribution. YC has hired 13 people in their media team now. So maybe if you're a small fund that's hiring someone part-time or hiring someone externally like us at Refinery Media. I guess the best way to wrap this up is, YC has understood that this attention is leverage. They made it really easy to be found, to be trusted, and for people to adopt their way of thinking and their thesis. And because of this, they've created the most powerful flywheel venture capital. They're seeing, 20,000 deals a batch. Now they have 4 batches. That's 80,000 deals that they're seeing a year. And with venture being so heavily predicated on power laws, so heavily predicated on distribution, this is just such an important advantage that they have in funding companies. But the gap is still wide open for funds to learn from their playbook. In the newsletter that I was going to send out with this, I talk about Sequoia as well, who are an incredible fund, but their YouTube channel is just so far behind, where someone like YC is still wide open about things like YouTube, about things like blogs, about things like newsletters. And, let's zoom out over a fund's life cycle. If your firm or fund is going to be around for 20 years, just look at where the journey could take you. And I think this is a really great example of a fund who's taken their media flywheel seriously, and it's generating incredible results, both from an audience perspective, but ultimately in a financial returns perspective with some of the companies that they backed, over $600 billion in public market valuations from YC companies. Hope you enjoyed this. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions or comments about this. And if you want me to do another fund or something else like this in the future, then just let me know. Thanks for watching.